mug. Don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. I'm Marama Tipole. The COVID response minister, Chris Hipkins, won't put a firm date on a Trans-Tasman bubble, but told reporters Cabinet will be discussing a plan shortly. RNZ understands ministers are actively working towards having a safe travel zone in place by the end of April. That would be on the condition there are no community outbreaks of COVID-19 or lockdowns in the meantime. The next step would be for the proposal to go to the full Cabinet, potentially on Monday. Minister Chris Hipkins was reluctant to talk about any firm dates.
I've been regularly discussing this with my Cabinet colleagues. I envisage that I will certainly be doing so over the coming week or two.
Chris Hipkins says airports would need a matter of days to get ready, but airlines would need a bit more time to gear up their operations. The Minister of Tourism, Stuart Nash, says he is not hiding from tourist operators during his visit to Queenstown tomorrow. A rally planned by frustrated tourist operators struggling due to the border closure was called off today after the Minister declined to attend. Mr Nash denied he was avoiding Queenstown tourist operators.
I'm giving quite a wide-ranging speech tomorrow morning, and then the day is full, meeting with tourism operators and locations and attractions throughout Queenstown. So it's not as if I'm giving the speech and then disappearing.
Tourism Minister Stuart Nash. Auckland businesses and sailing fans say it's a no-brainer for the next America's Cup to be held in New Zealand. 4 out of the past 6 regattas haven't been hosted by the defenders, and Team New Zealand's Chief Executive Grant Dalton says the next contest could be held overseas. The Auckland Mayor, Luna Rossa skipper and the New York Yacht Club Commodore would all like to see it stay here. The government has offered $5 million to the team if the event stays put. The manager of the sailor supply store near the viaduct, Rhys Innes-Jones, hopes they take it up.
As soon as Team New Zealand started racing, it was just like the tap, and we were busy from the moment we got out of our cars before even getting into the shop till we closed at 3:30 to go watch the race.
Rhys Innes-Jones. The head of Canterbury's Community Dental Service says leaving it to councils to decide whether to put fluoride in drinking water was never going to work. The government is to give the Director General of Health control over water fluoridation. Canterbury is the largest population without fluoride. The community dental head, Martin Lee, has been fighting for 20 years to get fluoride into the water.
The biggest obstacle has been the decision-making being left up to local authorities. What's happened is that it's turned into a political hot potato that very few local body politicians have ever wanted to grasp hold of.
Martin Lee says Canterbury children have 25% more dental problems than those in areas using fluoride. The Family Court has opened the door for a child in the care of Oranga Tamariki to be vaccinated despite protests from her father. The 4-year-old girl is living with caregivers but has not been given the normal childhood vaccines. Katie Doyle reports.
The father told the Family Court at Blenheim he did not see a need for immunisations, as the human body has its own natural immunity systems. He also raised worries relating to the contents of vaccines. The girl's mother had signed 2 consent forms allowing for vaccinations. Judge Richard Russell directed the child should be immunised in accordance with Ministry of Health guidelines, provided her GP agrees it's in her best interests. Ko Katie Doyle, TNA.
Residents in the Wairanapa town of Carterton are still being asked to boil their water, but authorities are confident they've located the source of E. coli. The council says residents need to continue boiling water and it will provide an update on Saturday. It's 5:03. Team New Zealand helmsman Peter Burling is unsure of the future of their America's Cup winning boat, Te Rehutai. Like most America's Cup boats, the high-tech foiling monohull faces being mothballed. The class for the next America's Cup is yet to be decided, and even if it is AC-75s, by the time the event rolls around, Te Rehutai will be an antique in racing terms. Burling hopes it hasn't been used for the last time.
Love to set sail again. It's an incredible boat. Really love sailing it, but in saying that, a couple of the other America's Cup boats are also on display around the viaduct.
Team New Zealand's Peter Burling. Chiefs co-captain and All Black halfback Brad Weber is pleased the head of referees has admitted match officials made several mistakes in the last round of Super Rugby Aotearoa. National referee manager Bryce Lawrence has said 2 key decisions, including a yellow card for Webber against the Crusaders and a disallowed try for the Blues against the Highlanders, were incorrect. Webber says it's good to see referees are being held accountable and it gives him more confidence that next time they'll get it right. Brad Webber's Chiefs play Hurricanes this weekend, with both sides chasing their first win of the season. Chelsea are through to the quarterfinals of football's Champions League with a 3-0 aggregate win over Spanish side Atletico Madrid. Defending champs Bayern Munich beat Lazio 2-1 to go through 6-2 on aggregate. That's the news.
America's Cup, the day after.
Kiwis can fly! Sailing's most treasured prize. The America's Cup stays in New Zealand.
I've had messages from everyone, from the Prime Minister, the high school kids, and it just means the world to us.
It was just gobsmacking. Many people out there watching and how amazing it was.
Oh, it's fantastic. We're really stoked. Yeah, really proud for them. They've done an amazing job. Lots of hard work and it paid off.
It's a family show. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, fine, partly cloudy with isolated showers mainly in the east. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mostly cloudy with a few showers. Waikato to Wellington and Wairarapa, also Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, generally fine with a few cloudy areas. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine. Buller and Westland, fine and cloudy periods with the odd shower possible. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, mainly fine, partly cloudy tomorrow with a few showers about the south coast. And for the Chatham Islands, fine spells. RNZ National, it's 6 minutes past 5. Good afternoon.
Thanks, Marama, and kia ora. This is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. New Zealanders and Australians could be winging their way over the Tasman for quarantine-free visits by the end of next month. Since Australia pulled out of Trans-Tasman bubble talks in February, this country has carried on with its own plan, and a proposal could go to the full cabinet as early as Monday. Pacific Islands could also get safe travel zones with New Zealand, with senior ministers long saying realm countries like the Cooks and Niue would be a priority. Our political editor Jane Patterson filed this report.
Hey New Zealand, we can't wait to see you. When you're good and ready, our table.
While politicians may have been trading barbs across the ditch, there's been plenty of interest from everyday Kiwis and Aussies in resuming Trans-Tasman travel. Government plans are now in full swing, with ministers actively working towards having a travel bubble in place by the end of April. However, COVID-19 Minister Chris Hipkins was coy about putting any firm date on it.
I've been regularly discussing this with my Cabinet colleagues. I envisage that I will certainly be doing so over the coming week or two.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern also not committing to any timeline.
I haven't put firm dates because I don't want there to be moving goalposts. I want to present people with some definitive dates that they can plan around. But we have said that soon we are working very, very hard to make sure that we give people as much certainty as possible.
If the plan gets the green light from Cabinet, Auckland International Airport has indicated it would need a few days to prepare for a safe travel zone with Australia. The South Island's biggest airport says it's ready to go. Chief Aeronautical and Commercial Officer Justin Watson says flights from Australia, known as green flights, will arrive at different times to ensure they don't mix with so-called red flights from quarantine countries.
What we are doing also, we've started construction on physically separating the terminal so that there'll be 2 pathways through the terminal which will allow simultaneous processing of red and green passengers.
Chris Hipkins says the airlines would need a bit more time, at least a couple of weeks.
They've got to scale back up again, get their planes back in the skies, get their crews back on board.
The opposition National Party's been ramping up the pressure this week, launching a petition that now has 40,000 signatures.
Queenstown and other towns that are dependent on tourism are actually dying, and if the Prime Minister doesn't essentially pull finger and get on with this, we're going to end up with the death of Queenstown on her.
National MP Chris Bishop says an April bubble would be good news, but comes too late.
It should have been in place already. It's frustrating that it has taken this long to get to this point. But, there'll be many New Zealanders in Australia who are keen to come home and many Kiwis keen to go to Australia. and of course families to be reunited, and of course tourism businesses will benefit from the opening of the bubble. So let's get on with it.
Not requiring all arrivals from Australia to isolate at the border will free up some room in managed isolation and quarantine. But Chris Hipkins says they'll still have to keep some space available as a backup in the event of an outbreak. Another consequence is a higher concentration of positive cases turning up at the border.
We will have to look at the risk profile, for example, with a higher risk cohort of passengers coming in. Australia is a very low risk at the moment. That will be something we have to think through about how we allocate rooms and so on, and that may have some impact on the overall allocation of rooms. Trans-Tasman will increase the number of rooms available for people coming from elsewhere, but it won't necessarily be a one-for-one swap.
There have been a number of false starts on the Trans-Tasman bubble, but all signs point to a proposal likely going to Cabinet on Monday, and alongside it a plan for realm countries, the Cook Islands and Niue. The door's already been partially opened, with New Zealand allowing passengers from the Cook Islands and more recently Niue to come here quarantine-free under certain conditions. Next week's visit of Cook's Prime Minister Mark Brown would provide the perfect opportunity to announce full quarantine-free travel. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
The prospect of being able to leave the country for a holiday in Australia raises the question about what happens if either country has an outbreak and the borders snap shut. So where does that leave travellers in getting travel insurance? Louise Tenuth went to find out.
The drum beats for a Trans-Tasman travel bubble have been getting louder. And today, more clarity on a timeline, with the government working towards April. People we spoke to in Auckland are keen on the chance for a holiday in Australia, but they'd be wanting full cover travel insurance if they go.
In terms of travel insurance, would you want 100% full coverage if that bubble does open up? You'd want that backing behind you in terms of travel insurance?
Yeah, I think I probably would, just to be safe. Like, generally when I've travelled in the past, I've always gone for the safer option, so I think that'd be the wise move. Weigh up your options with your cover, but it is slightly concerning for me.
Well, it's always wise to get travel insurance. Yeah.
People are travelling during COVID, they need travel insurance that covers fully. Yeah.
It's concerning because then you won't be able to help yourself because you're helpless when you're in lockdown. So at least when you have the insurance, you'll be comforted with the thought that someone is backing you up with in terms of your travel and all that, so they will pay for it.
Victoria Courtney is Flight Centre's General Manager of Product. She says the company works with Covermore Travel Insurance, but their offering only covers customers if they get COVID-19 themselves.
So whether that's that you yourself contract COVID and therefore your medical expenses are covered, and if you are required to isolate because you've come into contact with someone that's COVID and that then has a downstream impact on your holiday, that's where that cover kicks in.
But everything else is out of the question.
Changes with regards to lockdowns, etc., then it doesn't cover you for cancellations that are as a result of governments changing their stance on lockdown.
Brent Thomas is the president of the Travel Agents Association. He says only certain aspects of COVID could be covered by travel insurance, so customers will need to read the fine print.
Government say it's safe to travel, and then people do travel and catch COVID, for argument's sake, then they may well be covered under certain policies. Where they may not have cover is if the borders get shut and they have to come back and they have to pay for things like going into managed isolation. Those kind of costs would not be covered. If someone was overseas and they were staying in a certain place and someone else in that motel, hotel, apartment block got COVID and they were all locked down because of that, those kind of costs could be covered. But again, it's very much policy by policy.
He says they've been inundated with customers wanting some clarity.
What is covered and what's not. What people really want to have is a policy which covers pandemics rather than a specific part. But they need to understand what is not going to be covered under a pandemic. Broader cover for pandemics would be better than specific to COVID. But customers really need to make sure they understand their insurance policy so they clearly know what is covered and what's not.
All things travellers will have to consider before hopping on a plane for a holiday across the ditch. For Checkpoint, Louise Tenuth.
It's 5:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on that one. Would you be keen to travel to Australia for a holiday? Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And would you need full travel insurance to even consider leaving the country? Let us know your thoughts. The government is still working on a framework for special exemptions for a vaccine. Olympians and black caps are among those who could be eligible for early access to a vaccine under the national significance category. But they're not the only ones. This afternoon, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern launched New Zealand's campaign ahead of the World Expo trade fair in Dubai. RNZ understands some MFAT staff start heading offshore for it next month. Our reporter Nick Trubridge asked the Prime Minister about their vaccines.
Will government and foreign affairs staff travelling for this event be vaccinated before they leave?
Well, of course, our vaccination plan sees at the moment the general population being vaccinated from about mid-year onwards. And so that wide availability will be there. And of course, for the Expo, it's the latter half of the year that we expect people to be participating.
So we've heard that some will be travelling in late April. So you can't say definitively whether they will be vaccinated.
I can't specifically speak to that, but the majority of people, of course, it would be over the course of the latter months of the year after we have general vaccinations open for everyone. Minister, did you want to speak to that at all?
No, I think we're aware of the danger travelling internationally, very cautious, but as the Prime Minister said, we would expect that by that time many of the people would have had access to the vaccine. They are frontline people, they're travelling overseas, they are at risk, and so there will be perhaps priority given to them if they have to travel.
In terms of priority groups, there's that national significance priority group. Has the framework for that been set up yet?
No, of course, we've talked about that needing to come back to Cabinet. We're still waiting for that to happen. What we've generally said is that we know that there are groups that need to represent New Zealand abroad. You've had examples of, for instance, those who will be participating in the Olympics, but we will need to consider that framework as a whole. Cabinet expects to do that shortly.
When can you be more definitive on timelines? I can't
give you a specific date, but we're very mindful of, some of the timelines that people are working to. We've just got to make sure that we treat everyone consistently if we do have a special process for those representing New Zealand abroad.
Have there been further discussions with NZOC and obviously NZC, because the cricketers are going to be going overseas shortly as well, around priority vaccines? What discussions have you had with those?
Oh, look, I can't speak to some of those. It may well be the case that officials have had conversations to understand timelines that different codes or organisations are working to. But our expectation is that they'll come back to Cabinet with recommendations around how to manage the group of people who will be looking to represent New Zealand before mid-year, because that's, of course, when we'll be generally opening up our vaccine program.
Jacinda Ardern there. A quick traffic update before we move on. Up north first, there's been a truck breakdown on State Highway 1 near Mahurangi West Road, north of Puhoi. Stop-go traffic management is in place, which is causing some long delays in the area. Waka Kotahi is advising people to delay their journey or allow extra time. And on State Highway 1, at the other end of the country, there's stop-go in place in Mahino in North Otago. There's been a truck crash there, and the northbound lane is blocked between Gifford Street and Curry Road. Tensions are building in tourist towns where motels are now filling up with people unable to afford a place to live. About 100 people turned up to a meeting in Napier last night, which was organised by the National Party. Many there were concerned about reports of increasing crime and a lack of accommodation. They fear social supports aren't available at motels, some of which are looking after rival gang members along with whānau. And it's not just Napier affected, with other hotspots like Rotorua and Taupo also feeling the pressure of the country's housing crisis. Nita Blakeperson reports.
Like so many parts of the country, affordable housing is becoming harder to find in Hawke's Bay. In the Napier suburb of Ahuriri, that's seen a big increase in the use of motels to house people. Not everyone's happy about it.
There's been a growth in crime rate in the area. People are intimidated by groups of patched gang members walking around. And this is, no housing is, of course, the problem, because we're sure Ahuru and West Shore have got lots of motels that are just full of people requiring housing.
That's Keith Price, the local city councillor. He was at last night's meeting where local whānau, business owners and gang affiliates turned out to discuss claims of increased violence in the area. That's included a recent shooting at a popular pub between rival gangs. National Social Development and Employment spokesperson Louise Upston was there too. She says people from all over the country are staying in Napier's motels and it's causing issues for the area.
Come from Auckland, they've come from Wellington, they've come from the South Island, so a variety of places. And what it means is the social service agencies that are already under enormous pressure to support local people who have incredibly challenging circumstances to deal with, there's now an even greater demand on their services and they can't meet that need.
She says gangs were a large concern for many people she spoke to, with rival gang members often living in the same facilities. One motelier told RNZ a gang member threatened to shoot them and they were no longer accepting any emergency housing clients. The problems aren't limited to Napier. Rotorua councillors recently voiced concerns over gang members living next to children in motels there, and Louise Upston is seeing it in her part of the country too.
As MP for Taupo, it's clearly there's a large number of motels that are housing people in Taupo as well.
But the issue is getting people out of motels and into homes.
This came up at the meeting last night. Someone who was in a motel who wants to know for her and her children, actually, what is the government's answer? Because they want a life beyond this.
When it comes to the plan, Gang whānau member Cherie Kurarangi says the gangs have to be part of that discussion.
They're trying to deal with multiple adversities and these families are struggling, and it's about getting, the right kind of supports, the right kind of resources too. If you're not putting them in the right places, you're failing epically. And what are we going to do, house them all in jail? Radical thinking, all right.
She wants more inclusion and funding to help those most vulnerable.
Nobody's actually working inside the families. Imagine this. Imagine putting gang leaders as housing managers for some of our emergency housing. It's a different and unique, radical perspective, sure. But then you would be able to put it into their hands where the management of this could be so much better. Put the housing resources into our gang whānau. Why not? Everybody else's hands have failed.
Napier City Councillor Maxine Bogue looks after the city's housing portfolio. She says displacing people is always going to create issues.
In Honeyeater, you have some quite, high-class apartments, and you have luxury motels. And when you fill those motels with low-income people who are experiencing the frustration of not being able to have their own home and possibly not even being able to have members of their family visit them. It's a perfect storm, really. It's not an ideal situation.
There are currently more than 22,500 people on the public housing waitlist, with the government now spending nearly $1 million a day on motels and emergency accommodation. For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
The Director General of Health is being handed what's been described as a political hot potato no one wants to touch. From March next year, Ashley Bloomfield will be in control of water fluoridation, taking responsibility from councils. Local authorities are thrilled, but others are worried local voices will be lost. Here's political reporter Katie Scotcher.
The former Mayor of South Taranaki, Ross Dunlop, spent half of his 12 years in the job fighting to fluoridate water supplies in Patea and Waverley. An anti-fluoridation group took the council all the way to the Supreme Court.
The amount of resource that went into this issue for our council was just horrific, really.
Canterbury's top dentist, Martin Lee, has been fighting for 20 years to get fluoride into the water there. The region has the largest population in the country without fluoride.
The biggest obstacle has been the decision-making being left up to local authorities. What's happened is that it's turned into a political hot potato that very few local body politicians have ever wanted to grasp hold of.
But now the government's stepping in, announcing it will remove responsibility from local councils. It will instead hand it over to the Director General of Health, leaving the councils in charge of capital and operational costs of fluoridation. Associate Health Minister Aisha Verrill says giving responsibility to the head of the Ministry of Health will ensure a consistent nationwide response.
Obviously, we want things to be substantially more consistent than they are now, but the Director-General does need to take a case-by-case approach. There are individual practicalities with local water supplies that he'll need to work through.
Russ Dunlop says it's logical to take the power away from local authorities.
Councils don't make decisions about other health matters. They make decisions about roading and water and all that sort of stuff. They don't actually make decisions about, whether people should have hip replacements or, other sorts of stuff.
Rob Beagle-Hole from the New Zealand Dental Association says the government's plan is a win-win for everyone. He expects it will drastically reduce the amount of tooth decay in New Zealand.
We know that it will dramatically reduce the amount of pain and suffering that New Zealand children experience.
The government is picking up an old National Party bill that sat dormant since 2016 to make the change. The bill, as it stands, proposes decision-making on fluoridation shift from local authorities to district health boards. National's Shane Reti says the party supports water fluoridation and would prefer DHBs to be in charge.
Look, it's always been one of those sensitive issues, fluoride, and I think great care needs to be taken to make sure that you absolutely have the buy-in and general support of that region. This potentially would remove that, and it would go to central government, who would just potentially wash over the wishes of the region. That's our concern, that loss of local voice.
The government hopes to pass the legislation by the end of the year, and the Director-General of Health granted his new powers by March. Atu i te whare parimata, mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scott Churaho.
A family court judge has ordered a 4-year-old be vaccinated against her father's wishes. The little girl has 3 guardians. Oranga Tamariki and her mother agreed to her being immunised in line with the Ministry of Health's recommended schedule, including jabs for measles, whooping cough, rubella and chickenpox. The child's father, who had never been immunised as a kid, told the court he didn't want his daughter to be part of a forced vaccination program, and he believed the body has its own natural immune system to fight against disease. Judge Richard Russell said his primary consideration was the girl's well-being, and he ruled she should be vaccinated according to the ministry's guidelines, subject to a GP agreeing. Otago University lecturer Louise Delaney is a public health lawyer. She explains how the court reached its decision and what it might mean for other children.
Opinions and perspectives on immunisation in New Zealand, especially for children, perhaps vary. We've all got our opinions on the subject, and if we're adults, there's usually no question that whatever we want, that goes. But with children, things can be different, especially as the child, as clearly is the case here, isn't in a position to give her own opinion because she's pretty young. So situations like that are tricky, and when you've got different parental views, again as here, and guardianship views, then there is really no alternative but to make use of what we in our society consider as a very good dispute resolution mechanism, namely going to the courts. An outside view, one with legal authority to give their opinions, and otherwise it's just a question of, whichever parent, has the most say in a particular situation. And when we've got several people with very definite opinions, then you need an outsider, a court, who would give their opinion. So that's why it's not because the court considers itself an expert on vaccination, it's not a doctor in some grand sense, it's because it can solve a dispute that really there is no other source of dispute resolution.
You talked about beliefs there. So we have 2 parents, the mother who was happy to sign a consent for the child to be vaccinated, and the father who was opposed based on his beliefs. And what we think of his beliefs either way doesn't really matter here. No. The fact was that he had not been vaccinated as a child, and he believed that the body could, deal with its own immunity. So he didn't want his child vaccinated. Where is the legal line for intervention here, overriding someone's beliefs? Because some people believe in God and some people don't, and the court doesn't intervene in those beliefs.
That is correct when it comes to a case of an adult, or when it comes to the case of a child where all parents and all guardians agree. What is different here is the fact that there is no agreement. Yes, one person, the father it seems, has a certain particular belief and a particular wish, and other parties, including the mother and other guardians, have a different view. So we've got different views. So it's not just a vaccination, whether the court has the right or the expertise. The court's role and the court's expertise is in making a decision where different parties disagree. And that's what the issue is here. It's disagreement and having to work out what is the best way forward, taking into account primarily best technical and expert advice on what is considered in the best interest of the child, which here is vaccination.
Louise, ultimately, what some parents will want to know is, does this decision open the door for the state to intervene in my decision about whether my child should be vaccinated or not?
No, it doesn't, because we already have an immunisation schedule. It already does indicate that it is in the best interest, that it is advisable for a child, except for those with, clear medical conditions, which, tell against immunisation in particular cases. We already have an immunisation schedule, and in no way does it tell the parent that they must do anything about vaccination. So vaccination in New Zealand, even when the child goes to school, is not mandatory. So for measles, mumps, quite significant and serious illnesses at the moment that are recommended, that are on the ministry schedule, they in no way, and our law absolutely makes it clear that, because it explicitly says so in a little bit of law I'll just tell you about in a moment, the law makes it clear that immunisation, for example, is not a condition for going to primary school. The immunisation regs, which are made under the Health Act, that's our only little bit of law on the subject in New Zealand that's explicit on this subject. And it's mostly, in fact almost entirely, a way of just requiring schools to record the status of a child's immunisation, whether they're immunised, whether they're not. That's to guard against outbreaks of a particular disease and be able to send everybody home or some child home. But those immunisation regs specifically end by saying that, just to be on the safe side, just to be absolutely explicit, immunisation is not a condition of going to school. So if, long time ahead, we think about having vaccination on a childhood or any other schedule, I do not see any reason at the moment for making the COVID vaccine or a COVID vaccine any different from any of those other vaccines that we already have.
The thing is, though, Louise, looking at this, where guardians disagree, it appears that the court favours vaccination. Is that fair to conclude that?
The court favours and is directed to favour the best interests of the child. And in determining the best interests of the child, in this instance, there is expert health advice on what the best interests of the child are. So the court has looked to that. It's not an expert on vaccination. It, in itself, wouldn't have an opinion one way or another, but it is charged with taking into account a very relevant issue, which we're all very aware of these days with COVID, that is expert health advice. So it looks to expert advice, in this case health advice, in this case what the immunisation schedule says.
So in summary, Louise, would it be fair to say the court believes the science, and the science is in favour of vaccination for a child's well-being?
It is certainly true that science agrees with and has evidence to demonstrate that vaccination for those diseases that are on the schedule, not a blanket thing, for those diseases, it has looked at the evidence relating to each of those diseases. It changes that immunisation schedule frequently, as you'll see if you have a look at it, because there's lots of different versions and amendments and that sort of thing. It goes through the evidence for particular diseases and for particular vaccines and sees and assesses whether it's effective and helpful for the child to be vaccinated, whether the vaccine is safe, whether it is effective, all those kinds of issues. it's an ongoing process of assessment and rewriting that amendment schedule, that vaccination amendment schedule. So the court will look to that as a form of evidence. That's all it is. That's what the courts do. They take into account evidence when deciding, and that's what the court has done here.
And that is public health lawyer Louise Delaney. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National is the Minister Stuart Nash dodging Queenstown tourism operators. We've held on to the old mug, but what will it take to keep the race on New Zealand waters? And we meet the oldest new cop on the beat. We would love your feedback as always. Get in touch via text 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And Marama is here with the headlines now.
Thank you. The COVID response minister, Chris Hipkins, won't put a firm date on a Trans-Tasman bubble, but says Cabinet will be discussing a plan shortly. RNZ understands ministers are actively working towards a safe travel zone with Australia by the end of April, as long as there are no community outbreaks of COVID-19. The Tourism Minister denies he is avoiding tourist operators during his visit to Queenstown tomorrow, but says he can't meet with everyone. A rally planned by tourist operators frustrated by the border closure was called off today after Stuart Nash turned down an invitation to attend. Auckland businesses and sailing fans say it's a no-brainer for the next America's Cup to be held in New Zealand. 4 out of the past 6 regattas have not been hosted by the defenders, and Team New Zealand chief Grant Dalton says the next one could be held overseas. The government has offered $5 million to the team if the event stays put. A former mayor who fought to get the water in his region fluoridated says it's logical to take the power away from local authorities. Councils are currently responsible for deciding whether to put fluoride in the water, but the government is giving control to the Director General of Health. The former South Taranaki Mayor Ross Dunlop says he spent half of his 12 years in office fighting to fluoridate water supplies in Patia and Waverley. A bill aimed at making the Child Support Act fairer has passed its 3rd reading in Parliament. The Child Support Amendment Bill amends the original legislation, which helps provide financial support for more than 185,000 children. A spokesperson for the group occupying disputed land at Shelley Bay in Wellington says future legal action is possible. An attempt to block a planned development on the Marama Peninsula site on the grounds of traffic and infrastructure issues has failed. But the fight over who owns the land continues, and Mo Whenua spokesperson Catherine Love says their grievance is different. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6 with more news.
Thanks, Marama. And kia ora anō, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And it's time to get to the business news now with Nicholas Poynton. So, Nicholas, the headline reads GDP surprise. So what is the surprise?
Yeah, well, the surprise is a 1% fall in GDP over the 4th and final quarter of last year. That came really as a surprise to many of the economists because the consensus was economic growth of about 0.1%. And that's because not many economists were actually forecasting that activity in the construction sector would fall by nearly 9%. And the reason why that's a surprise is because since we've come out of lockdown last year, the construction sector has really been booming. It's been a key sector in recruiting a lot of people, but it's actually those big ticket projects, commercial construction. While we know that residential construction is running hot, it's those other projects where we are starting to see a bit of a softening. And we actually kind of got a bit of a warning about this a couple of weeks ago when we actually interviewed the chief executive of Steel and Tube. This was for their half-year result. And he said one of the things that he was noticing in the business was that its commercial arm wasn't as strong as its residential arm at the moment. And it's unclear to know how long this is likely to persist because residential building consents are through the roof at the moment. They're hitting levels or eclipsing records that we saw last in the 1970s. And when we spoke to ASB's senior economist today, she says one of the issues that we might have to factor in going forward is some of the challenges around the demand for resources, whether that be skilled staff, but also, the necessary equipment you need to build houses. I did a story earlier this year about how some builders or some in the construction sector were struggling to get their hands on sort of basic equipment, things like glass, wires, plastic piping for tubes, that sort of thing. We also saw in the data, though, there was a sharp fall in retail trade, speaks to the loss of international tourists, but perhaps it's been a lot more severe than people first thought. And also the per capita GDP, which is a measure of each person's share of the value of the economy, that was 4.9% lower over the previous year. Jane Turner from ASB, she says that the result we got today is likely to squash any further talk about a rates hike in the near term, and it's perhaps risen or it's increased the risk of maybe rates cuts being put back on the table. She's of the view, though, if further stimulus is needed, it's best to come from the government and not from the Reserve Bank.
Okay, let's move on to this medical practice. They got hacked, did they?
Yeah, this was a story that we reported today, that a Wellington dental practice was the victim of a hack earlier in the week. A hacker managed to get access to a staff member's email address and gained access to patients' personal information, the nature of which we do not know yet. The company that owns Wellington Oral Surgery, that's the practice, is Lumino. Their website states that they are nationwide. They own more than 120 practices around the country. I was actually able to speak to the company's general manager in New Zealand. He told me that he's incredibly saddened and disappointed that this happened, but he says he's confident that it's a one-off incident.
And sorry, Nicholas, to interrupt. Are they confident it's limited to that one particular branch?
So that's where the confidence comes from, right? That it's unique to this one location. He told me that the firm did have robust cybersecurity systems in place. However, he would not tell me the name of their provider. He says it has notified the provider about the breach. It's also told the Privacy Commission as well as the cybersecurity advisor CERT-NZ, and now an investigation is underway. It is not yet known how many patients have been affected. The suggestion is that so far is that it's just a handful. There has been no evidence to suggest that this is a ransomware attack. That's where the information is taken and the firm is extorted, required to pay some sum of money to get it back. So far, there have been reports that some patients have been getting suspicious emails, and the advice from Lumino and CERT-NZ is not to click on those or anything that looks suspicious, sort of as normal practice when it comes to these sorts of things, because especially if you get an invoice from this company for outstanding payments, because that's a sure sign of a phishing scam, and that's when an entity mimics a legitimate organisation or an individual in an attempt to get you to hand over your personal information and financial data.
Do we know if they have directly contacted the patients concerned?
Yes, they have. So they put out a notice to patients on Tuesday, and it was at that stage that we became aware of this story.
Okay. And what numbers do you bring from the market, Nicholas?
I have them here somewhere. Yes. The NZX it fell 0.5% by about 126 points to 12,496, and that's really on the back of those GDP numbers. The dollar is trading at 72.4 US cents, 92.6 Australian, and 51.9 British pence.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with Business News. Now, the Tourism Minister has copped some flack from operators who are frustrated they couldn't meet with him during his trip south. Stuart Nash has been visiting businesses in Invercargill today before driving to Te Anau to meet with businesses and residents. It comes as tourist businesses in the region have struggled to survive since the borders closed. But as tourism reporter Tess Brunton discovered, most operators desperate to meet him were out of luck.
The morning started with some optimistic reports about the Trans-Tasman bubble opening mid-next month. But Tourism Minister Stuart Nash remained close-lipped, saying no decision has been made yet, and it's the Prime Minister's call.
When we talk about the opening of the Australian bubble, we do need to be aware that Australians spend about $2.9 billion in our economy, but New Zealanders spend about $2.3 billion in the Australian economy. Domestic tourism is still the backbone of our tourism industry. I mean, pre-COVID, it still counted for 60% of our tourist market. So we need to be clear that when an Australian bubble does open, it won't just be one-way traffic.
He expects there will be time given for businesses to ramp back up once a date for the bubble is confirmed. Fuel Than Jet co-owner Chris Adams wanted to see more communication and leadership, but says he's been left disappointed.
It doesn't pay the bills being motivated, but it certainly keeps you going. And if you're 50-50 on whether your business should close down or stay going, to have that motivation from it, that the bubble will open as soon as they can, it can make all the difference to keep businesses going, which means when the tourism comes back, more businesses stay open in Te Anau.
which makes it a town to visit. There's 11 empty buildings in Te Anau at the moment. We don't want it to be 12 to 20 empty buildings. We want it to be those buildings filling back up really shortly. So we want to see some leadership.
Stuart Nash drove to Te Anau this afternoon for meetings with the Fiordland Business Association, Fiordland Rotary Club and Fiordland Lobsters. Chris Adams has been asking to meet with the minister for months, but says he wasn't invited to any of the meetings and only found out about the trip through the media. He wants to ask if the minister is really advocating for tourism.
To actually show no leadership, it's really disappointing. So, if he'd come to Te Anau, why couldn't he have had a public meeting where some of us leaders, business operators, leaders could have gone just to listen, even if he had no questions? But he's made it such a secret squirrel thing. It actually hasn't helped the attitude of Te Anau businesses.
Stuart Nash denied hiding from or avoiding tourism operators.
Not hiding at all. I mean, I've got a very full diary tomorrow. If I met with every single tourist operator who wanted to meet with me, I wouldn't be able to do anything else in the day. I'm giving quite a wide-ranging speech tomorrow morning, and then the day is full, meeting with tourism operators and locations and attractions throughout Queenstown. So it's not as if I'm giving the speech and then disappearing.
Trips and Tramps owner Steve Norris has a simple request for the minister.
Just listening to the people, listening to how it's affecting businesses, communities, because it's not just the businesses. Businesses are part of the community, and, if you're not employing staff leave the area, school numbers drop. It's not just the tourism business, it's the ripple-on effect that it has right for the whole communities.
He's passed on a concession fee question to ask the minister at one of his meetings.
Everyone's got a year's relief through until June this year, and that was all based around, borders being closed, and obviously we still don't know if any borders are going to be open, and it would be nice if the department continue that on. I'm not saying for another year, but maybe 6 months, 9 months, hopefully a year, just to help everyone get back on their feet again, even if borders do open.
Stuart Nash could not be drawn on his support package expected to front Cabinet later this month. Instead, he says he'll outline his game plan for tourism in Queenstown tomorrow.
I will sort of articulate where I see the role government playing in this, but I also want the tourism industry to take responsibility and say, OK, we understand this, let's move forward together in partnership with the government and see and realise this vision for a reimagined tourism.
While tourist operators can hear the minister's vision tomorrow, they're expecting a longer wait for news on the Trans-Tasman bubble. For Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, Te Anau.
It's 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And after 6 tonight, the Associate Health Minister on handing the hot potato of fluoridation to Dr Ashley Bloomfield. One of the country's largest trucking companies is struggling to identify a driver caught on camera performing a risky overtaking manoeuvre on State Highway 2. Video of the heart in your mouth incident was sent to Mainfreight before Christmas and has recently emerged on the social media platform TikTok. Our reporter Robin Martin has more.
This was the moment a Hawke's Bay woman says she had her heart in her mouth while travelling along State Highway 2. A Mainfreight truck pulls out to pass the vehicle she's travelling in and crosses back to the left-hand side of the road, it appears just narrowly missing impact with an oncoming car. The woman, who RNZ has agreed to identify via her TikTok handle, Scooby, says the close call happened while she was a passenger in a friend's truck returning to the bay.
So it was early evening, we were heading back from Masterton. We said to this guy that he could go around us. And then the car came round and we let him know that there was a car coming, but he kept going. So we ended up having, you can't see it in the video, but we ended up having to slow right down so that he could actually get past us.
In the video, the lights of an approaching car are clearly visible as the Mainfreight truck comes alongside the vehicle it's overtaking. They then whiz past just after the truck pulls across to the left and applies the brakes. Scooby says it was too close for comfort.
My heart went into my throat. It was definitely one of those moments that I will remember, and there's not many of those that I will actually remember till the day I die.
The Road Transport Forum is a lobby group set up to advocate for the trucking industry. Its chief executive, Nick Leggett, agrees the overtaking manoeuvre isn't the best.
It looks tight to me. I'd say that I'm concerned, but it's up to the driver and the company to deal with this.
But Mr Leggett is willing to cut the driver a little slack.
I can't tell from that the stretch of road and how much distance was involved. What I can say is that we obviously expect the law to be observed at all times by truck drivers, and there is no excuse for dangerous driving.
Mainfreight was unavailable for an interview. In a statement, it says it's the expectation of its owner drivers that they will drive with utmost care and safety on New Zealand roads. The company says the video was shot before Christmas, but only recently uploaded to TikTok. It says staff watched it for the first time today and had yet to identify the driver involved. That's a surprise to Scooby, who sent the video to Mainfreight's Hamilton office shortly after the incident happened in August. RNZ has seen evidence that she did this.
That's ridiculous. It's been how many months now and they still haven't found him. They can see where they are, what speed they're doing, all that kind of thing on a computer screen. All they need to do is punch in the number plate or the truck number and they can find them there and then and just go back through the records.
Nick Leggett of the Road Transport Forum also thought the company should have been able to identify the driver by now.
I would have thought so, yeah. But I assume that there's a place and time that's been supplied to them along with this recording. I mean, it's that's what I would expect.
Meanwhile, Scooby hopes her video gives the driver pause for thought.
I certainly would, because I worked it out the other night. If all vehicles were full and he had a passenger as well, and the car was full with 5 people, that would be 9 lives possibly impacted by his silly decision.
Mainfreight says follow-up discussions and action will be taken with the driver once they've been identified. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Robin Martin-Aho.
The EU is threatening to halt exports of COVID-19 vaccines to the UK. The UK has vaccinated about 25 million people, although authorities are warning of a significant reduction in available vaccines next month. The BBC's Nick Beak reports.
In Prague, in Paris, and once again in Bergamo in northern Italy, COVID patients gasping for air. The nightmare prospect of a third wave in Europe is now real. The continent's also facing a vaccination crisis. It's not getting the doses it ordered. And today, a warning the EU would do everything needed to get its fair share.
All options are on the table. We are in the crisis of the century. And I'm not ruling out anything for now, because we have to make sure that Europeans are vaccinated as soon as possible.
Officials in Brussels have faced heavy criticism over their vaccine programme and have now come out fighting. The EU says it sent millions of doses to the UK in recent weeks, but seen little in return from AstraZeneca. But remarkably, 7 million of the company's jabs are sitting in fridges, and its use has now been suspended in most EU countries. It's still available here in Belgium, but increasing numbers are saying they don't want the AstraZeneca shot.
I'm not sure that it will be okay if it's Astra for old people. So then that's why now I'm afraid. Everybody is afraid of this vaccine.
And that was a report from Nick Beak. Her height or lack of it is what initially stopped her signing up for the police. But age hasn't been a barrier for Linda Perry, who is officially the oldest new constable to graduate police college. She's 57 years old and has finally realised her dream of putting on the blue uniform about 40 years after she first tried to sign on. Constable Perry is the first to admit it's been a long time coming.
I first tried to get into the police when I was 18, and that was in Wanganui in 1981, and it was a pretty short experience because I was just told then on the spot I'm too short, which it was back in the day. There was a height criteria, and I just have never been able to get it, off my chest, basically. I just kept thinking about it. So 10 years after that, I tried again. I was in Auckland at the time, and my son was about 2.5 years old, and went so far through the process. I did my physical, which was fine, and then you go up and do the academic side of things and failed on the maths component, which doesn't surprise me. And then I just left it. It was just a bit too hard back then. I had no support, no family support there in Auckland, so I just left it. But honestly, it just kept eating away at me. It was a big regret. And as time went on, I thought, it's just too late. And I just thought, I'm too old for this now. I didn't feel too old. I just thought they wouldn't consider me. So it wasn't until a couple of years ago when I read I think it was on Facebook, a constable, Susie Weeks, who was in her 50s, early 50s, who graduated. And I was like, seriously, I couldn't believe it. So I just applied then and there that day. And then that would set the ball rolling. Yeah, so that's that.
So third time lucky, basically.
Pretty much, yeah.
Hey, I'm curious, how tall are you?
So I'm 164.
Right, and that was too short at the time?
Yes, it was.
Hey, you mentioned the fitness test, and we've been talking about you in the office, we have to confess. We've been talking about you in the office, and we've been talking about the fitness test. How was it, the fitness test, getting into the police college this time round? Did you find it easy, hard, what?
Oh, no, the fitness test was probably never really too much of a problem for me. So it was fine the first time when I was 28, 29, and this time it was fine. It's not easy. You've got to do a reasonably fast run within a amount of time, push-ups, jumps, that kind of thing. So that side of it's fine. You also at college have to do another test, which is one where you've got to climb walls, get over
a 6-foot wall,
things.
Linda.
Yeah, but that's okay. You just practice. You just got to train. If you want it, you just got to train for it. But for me, it's still the academic side of things. I'm not used to studying, and I never was even at school. So, that part was, for me, the hardest part. But, if you want it hard enough, you just work hard at it. You really have to, yeah.
What was the makeup of your class? I'm curious in terms of age spread.
Yeah, so our age spread was from 19 to 57. 56, 57, 57. So I was 57 when I graduated, So that was the spread. The wing that it went through was a very diverse wing. It actually was 55% female. So as well, and then we had a huge range of nationalities. It was really cool. So, you can say that the police are very diverse now.
Did you notice the age difference in your class?
Yeah, because clearly, a 19-year-old is very, very different to someone in their 40s, 50s. But to get that far, they have to have a level of maturity, I think, just to have got there, the younger ones. But you all have strengths, in different areas, whether that be communication. Some are fitter than others. Some are amazing at studying and retaining information. Some are amazing at role playing, which is a big part of college as well, which, is not my thing. But, so you just work on those strengths that you have. And that's what I think everyone brings to the police, It's that diversity and all of those different things.
So as a 57-year-old, what do you think your strengths are?
It's probably now is how I relate to people, is communicating with them. I think I can, I'm quite calm in situations as well. I really enjoy dealing with, the family harm side appeals to me, working with children. So just talking things through with them, I really enjoy that side of things. And I do think that is one of my strengths.
Why don't you think there are more people at your age and stage going into the police force then?
Well, maybe they just didn't realise that it was a possibility. And I think that my story, especially on the police intranet, has highlighted that, because I've had quite a few lovely emails from some people who have said the same thing. They just didn't realise. that it was possible for them, and they're like, wow, that's great, now I can start looking at it. Another one whose mum had obviously been talking about it for some time, she said, oh, great, I'm going to get back onto mum and tell her she can do this, So I think a lot of people had given up, a little bit like I had. I couldn't get rid of that feeling that I really wanted to do it, but it wasn't until I saw that actually, gosh, I can do this, that I actually went for it again.
What did you do for a job before this?
I was in real estate. I was in real estate. I worked for Harcourts for 16 years.
Wow, so it really is a change of pace.
It is a change of pace. However, my day-to-day work was dealing with a lot of different people, a lot of different personalities. They were in different situations, whether they were dealing with grief or they didn't want to sell their house. It could be mortgagee. So, you have to be able to relate to people. So that side of it actually transfers over really nicely, I think. So I think that experience has helped me or will help me.
And that was Constable Linda Perry, who at 57, the oldest new constable graduate.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Marama Tibole. The Prime Minister says the government is taking seriously the planning and protocols on opening a Trans-Tasman bubble. RNZ understands the plan is to have a safe travel zone between Australia and New Zealand in place by the end of April. Jacinda Ardern says the government is working hard to establish the bubble soon, but no timeline has been set.
Because Australia is dealing with the equivalent of one state in New Zealand, we're dealing with multiple. And so that means that there is a chance we could have an outbreak that could cause a pause in travel. And so we need to put in place protocols to manage that. We also need to make sure we give forewarning to people that may occur.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. The National Party is concerned local voices will be lost when the Director General of Health is handed responsibility for water fluoridation. Local authorities are currently responsible for the decision, but the government wants to ensure there is a consistent nationwide approach. The government is picking up an old National Party bill to make the change. The bill, as it stands, proposes decision-making on fluoridation shift from local authorities to district health boards. National's Shane Reti says the party would prefer the bill doesn't change.
Look, it's always been one of those sensitive issues, fluoride, and I think great care needs to be taken to make sure that you absolutely have the buy-in and general support of that region. This potentially would remove that, and it would go to central government, who would just potentially wash over the wishes of the region. That's our concern, that loss of local voice.
Shane Reti. A Crown prosecutor has told a jury they must put feelings of prejudice and sympathy aside when deciding whether a prominent businessman accused of indecent assault is guilty or not. The Crown is making its closing address in the trial of the businessman. Jean Bell reports from the High Court at Auckland.
The businessman, who has name suppression, denies indecently assaulting 3 men and making 2 attempts to dissuade a witness. His co-accused, who also has name suppression, faces 1 charge of attempting to dissuade a witness, which he too denies. Crown prosecutor Simon Foote told the jury they might be disgusted or feel sorry for the businessman, but these feelings must be put to one side when making a verdict. The defence case is that the claims are made up and that the complainants visited the businessman with the intention of getting money. Ko Jean Bell TNA.
The defence has opened its case in the trial of 2 men charged over the shooting and robbery at the Red Fox Tavern more than 30 years ago. Publican Chris Bush was fatally shot at the pub in Maramarua in October 1987, and the offenders took off with tens of thousands of dollars. Mark Hoggett and another man who cannot be named are on trial in the High Court at Auckland. In an opening statement to the jury, one of the lawyers for the unnamed man, Carla Dawson, said neither of the accused were responsible. A scaffolding firm has been ordered to pay more than $40,000 for unlawfully deducting its employees' wages. But the company claims it hasn't yet heard about the fine. Here's our reporter, Tom Kitchen.
The Labour Inspectorate investigated Tiger Scaffold after getting complaints from the Philippines Embassy on behalf of 3 workers. The investigation found the employer made deductions for workers' accommodation and training, which they never attended. Tiger Scaffold didn't engage with the Inspectorate, saying they had other things to do. It's been listed on the immigration stand-down list, preventing them from hiring new migrant workers. RNZ contacted Tiger Scaffold for comment, but a spokesman said he hadn't heard about the fine. He declined to comment further. Ko Tom Kitchener-Ho.
A bill aimed at making the Child Support Act fairer has passed its third reading in Parliament. The Child Support Amendment Bill, which was introduced last year, amends the original legislation which helped provide financial support for more than 185,000 children. This bill simplifies penalty rules to make them fairer and introduces employer deductions of child support for parents who are newly liable under the scheme. The creative director of the Tokyo Olympic Games has resigned after suggesting a female entertainer could take part in the opening ceremony dressed as a pig. The BBC's Dan Johnson has the details.
Hiroshi Sasaki is out on his ear after suggesting in group messages that the entertainer Naomi Watanabe should descend from the sky in a pig costume for what he called the Olympic segment of the opening ceremony. He's apologised, saying he now recognised the idea was hugely insulting to Miss Watanabe. It's a further twist in the tale of the Tokyo Games, delayed from last summer because of the pandemic and under new leadership after the committee's chief got the chop when he said women talk too much in meetings.
Dan Johnson reporting. It's 6:05. To sport now, it may not be long before Peter Burling and Blair Tuke are back in the sailing class that made them household names. The pair have celebrated their defence of the America's Cup, but there is no time to rest. Their next major regatta is the opening round of Sail GP in Bermuda next month, followed by the defence of their 49er title at the Olympics in July. Burling says they'll be returning to the 49er very soon, but a lot of planning is required ahead of the Olympics.
We're tossing up between how much time to spend in what country on the build-up to Japan and just how that build-up actually does look. And a lot of that depends on kind of COVID restrictions and getting in and out of certain places. And it's going to be probably next job's getting into some planning for how the next 6 months is going to unfold.
Team New Zealand helmsman Peter Burling. The Highlanders' backup halfback Folau Fakatava is staying with the Southern Super Rugby side. Last year's NPC Player of the Year, the Hawke's Bay player's future has been a talking point in recent weeks, with other super teams chasing his signature. But Fakatava has committed to the Highlanders until the end of the 2023 season, meaning he'll remain the backup to All Blacks halfback Aaron Smith. Meanwhile, the Hurricanes will have an inexperienced halves pairing for Saturday's game against the Chiefs in Wellington. Rookie halfback Luke Campbell gets his first start, while Auburn Ledger will debut for the Hurricanes at first five. Defending champs Bayern Munich and Chelsea are both through to the quarterfinals of football's Champions League, and that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, this week's overseas correspondent Brian McDonald is on the line from Sochi, Russia. It's not as cold as Moscow. Alison Balance is relocating seabirds on Mana Island. And Duncan McGillivray attempts to tease out the science facts behind the fairy tale of Rumpelstiltskin. Not the foot through the floor bit, but the straw into gold. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, partly cloudy with isolated showers mainly in the east. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mostly cloudy with a few showers. Waikato to Wellington and Wairarapa, also Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Generally fine with a few cloudy areas. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury fine. Bulla and Westland fine and cloudy periods with the odd shower possible. Otago, Southland and Fiordland mainly fine. Partly cloudy tomorrow with a few showers about the south coast. And for the Chatham Islands, fine spells. RNZ National, it's 6:07.
Thanks, Marama. And this is Checkpoint. If you're just joining us, I'm Lisa Owen. The America's Cup is safely secured in Team New Zealand's hands, and now there's mounting pressure for the event itself to stay put in New Zealand waters. But Team New Zealand's boss, Grant Dalton, has cast his eyes further afield to see what options lie offshore. As RNZ reporter Katie Todd found out, that could earn the wrath of business owners, government ministers, Auckland Council and sailing fanatics.
Any move by Team New Zealand to scout a location outside New Zealand for the next America's Cup would mean turning down a pot of money offered by the government. $5 million has been offered up as initial support to keep the team together, but the team will only get it if they commit to staging the event here. The minister responsible for America's Cup support, Stuart Nash, thinks a New Zealand-based event would be a chance to showcase the country and make use of the infrastructure that's already been built here.
We have offered them $5 million to keep the team together. Obviously, I've been clear that that comes with the condition that the Cup is raced in New Zealand. I mean, why would we give away taxpayers' money for the Cup to be raced offshore?
The government, Team New Zealand and the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron have 3 months to negotiate a deal to keep the regatta here. Jacinda Ardern says she hopes it stays in New Zealand.
It's been a hard year. The team have provided, such optimism and excitement for everyone. But what we need to do is make sure that, we try and be consistent. The government has played a role for successive Cups in keeping the team together, but equally, we need to make sure that New Zealand derives some benefit around hosting. And so those are all the things we keep in mind.
Auckland businesses can also attest to the economic benefits of hosting the event here, with an estimated 200,000 attending the sailing event in the final week of racing. Business group Heart of the City says spending in shops, restaurants and bars hit 95% on the same period last year. Reece Innes-Jones is the manager of sailor supplies near the viaduct.
As soon as Team New Zealand started racing, it was just like the tap, and we were busy from the moment we got out of our cars before even getting into the shop till we closed at 3:30 to go watch the race.
Neil Morris co-owns Johnny Ray's Coffee, where Team New Zealand got their morning fix. He agrees it's a no-brainer to keep the event nearby.
During the Cup time, it's amazing. People are getting down here early, they're parking, they're buying team shirts, they're buying caps, and they're supporting all the coffee bars, the restaurants. So for us, when the America's Cup is on, we pay our bills.
16-ton bar manager Declan says the Cup brought in a steady flow of customers.
We had a week of full-on customers. It was pretty packed out. Yesterday here, you couldn't even see the floor. It was just completely full. It's been great. I can't see any reason why we wouldn't want to have it again here. It was just, it was too much fun.
It's a feeling shared by Aucklanders on the viaduct today, who say the city had a great time hosting and deserves another crack at putting on the show.
Yeah, I think we put on a good event this year, and it'd be cool to see it back here again.
We've got to keep it here.
We've got the Cup, we own it, we deserve it, we should dictate where it goes. It's our Cup. Come on.
The skipper of the defeated Luna Rossa team and the Commodore of the New York Yacht Club have also voiced support for it to be in New Zealand. They're backed by businesses and fans alike, keen to see the old mug hoisted at the viaduct again. For Checkpoint, Katie Todd, TNA.
Speaking of America's Cup fans, we have an Uber fan a little later in the program. The government is plonking the issue of water fluoridation in the basket of the Director-General of Health. It's a hot-button issue which has spurred fierce debate among several councils over whether the mineral should be added to drinking water. Associate Health Minister Aisha Verrall says centralising the decision-making process will ensure there's a consistent approach across the country. She told our political reporter Katie Scotcher what else drove the decision.
There had been a proposal that fluoridation decisions should move from local councils to district health boards, but when I came in as a new minister, my sense was that wouldn't achieve the health goals that we have of having a more science-based and consistent approach across the country.
And what's the time frame moving forward on this?
So we aim to pass the bill this year, and then decisions could be made by the Director-General from March.
And when are you introducing the SOP?
So we have to draft the SOP first, and then there'll be a select committee process later on.
From March, when the Director-General of Health becomes responsible for the decisions, how much water, I guess, are you hoping will be fluoridated? Do you have a goal or what you would like to see rolled out across the country?
Obviously, we want things to be substantially more consistent than they are now, but the Director-General does need to take a case-by-case approach. There are individual practicalities with local water supplies that he'll need to work through.
Fluoride's a bit of a controversial topic. What sort of response are you expecting?
Well, I think we've just been through this big experience as a country where we've seen the value of a consistent central, nationally led science-based response, and I'd like to emphasise that.
And how does fluoride improve dental health? How do you hope and expect that it will improve the situation in New Zealand?
Yeah, it can reduce tooth decay by about 40% for kids and still a substantial amount for adults as well, maybe 20 or 30%. We know from a recent study in New Zealand that children going to hospital with dental caries is much more likely in places that don't have a fluoridated water supply.
And that was the Associate Health Minister Aisha Verrill speaking to Katie Scotcher. A new attempt to block a controversial development in Wellington has failed, but that doesn't mean it's smooth sailing ahead. The High Court's dismissed an application to review the decision to grant a resource consent to the Shelley Bay project. Getting the consent has been fraught with the saga starting in 2016, and as Emma Hatton reports, it's unlikely to be over anytime soon.
It's a cloud that's hung over Miramar for the last 5 years. Will it or won't it happen? Local business owners RNZ spoke to today divided on whether the $500 million development was a good idea.
My thoughts are that the environment is the paramount thing, and also the interests of the Mau Whenua. I think they are the people who have the most say, and also I do have big questions about a development there so close to the sea.
Having more people on the peninsula overall in the long term, in theory, is a good thing, but yeah, whether the infrastructure will be able to sustain or be able to maintain it. We have a bit of trouble with infrastructure already in the Miramar area, especially when it rains heavily.
It started in 2016 when the Wellington Company, headed by high-profile developer Ian Castles, applied for resource consent to build a mixed-use residential and commercial development. Wellington City Council granted him the consent, but business lobby group Enterprise Miramar sought a judicial review. The application was initially dismissed, but then the decision was quashed by the Court of Appeal, and the council was told to reconsider. It appointed a panel of independent commissioners to do that. In October 2019, the panel decided to grant the consent, and it was a review of that decision, brought again by Enterprise Miramar, which was upheld yesterday by the High Court in Wellington. Ian Castles says he's glad but not surprised.
We had a bit of a suspicion that it would be fine. I mean, we worked on it for a long time. We didn't really think there was an issue with the consent because we've spent a lot of time working and making submissions and engaging consultants and spending a lot of money. So it's well tested. If it isn't bulletproof now, it must be very close to it.
He says it will be a beautiful development, adding 300 houses and various commercial sites such as craft breweries. But the chairman of Enterprise Miramar, Thomas Wutzler, is really disappointed. He says this development will have major traffic impacts for the peninsula and that Shelley Bay Road will be unsafe for cyclists, runners and walkers. As well as that, iwi members dispute the sale of land to Mr Castles in the first place. Dr Catherine Love, a spokesperson for the group of Taranaki Whānui iwi members Mau Whenua, who are occupying the site, says they empathise with Enterprise Miramar, but their fight is different.
There has been no legal transfer of our iwi-owned land to the Wellington Company. So it makes no difference in regard to that. While we tautoko Enterprise Miramar, we're resolute in our position and our occupation.
Wellington's Mayor, Andy Foster, has always been opposed to the development, but says it looks like it's all over.
I'm unaware of any other legal processes that are, well, there's clearly none in train. I'm unaware of any processes that anybody's contemplating. So, yeah.
Councillor Fleur Fitzsimons has always supported the plan and hopes the High Court's decision puts an end to the saga.
There were now 3 independent assessors. There's a High Court judge. And all these people have comprehensively looked at the work that council officers did around traffic and around the resource consent and have found that it was totally appropriate and that they acted with integrity. So I really hope this is the end of the matter and we can draw a line under this and move on.
But Dr Love says no way. There's more to come.
The focus of our legal actions is to prove that the sale and transfer was illegal and invalid in both English law and Māori law. We're talking at political levels, we're talking at court and criminal levels as well. So watch this space.
The peaceful occupation of the site at Motukairangi continues. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
It is 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Former All Black Julian Savea is learning to speak Samoan to have a deeper connection with his heritage. After 3 years in France, Savea is back playing for the Hurricanes, where his younger brother Adi is now captain. This weekend, Super Rugby Aotearoa is honouring Māori and Pacifica cultures with a mana moana round. And Julian says he and Adi are learning to speak Samoan as part of that. He told Joe Porter while his parents speak Samoan, he's not fluent yet.
Good for me anyway to connect with my culture and just to, I guess learn a lot more about it and being able to connect with mum and dad a little bit more deeper. So,
did you speak Samoan in the house growing up?
Mum and dad spoke to us quite a bit, so we understood it, but in terms of speaking it fluently, probably not. And so hence I'm trying to learn it and be more fluent in that aspect of my life.
When did you sort of dive back into learning the language?
Literally just this year, like properly. We've got a teacher that comes in that helps us out. So yeah.
Has that been really cool? Just not only to re-embrace some of the language, but does it give you a deeper sense of culture?
Yeah, of course. And just you're learning about yourself, where you're from, a little bit more deeper connection. From where I'm from, and we'll love to go back to Samoa as well. So.
And I suppose you'd like to be able to speak it to your children.
Of course, and that's the ultimate goal for me is to be able to teach my kids.
And is Adi on the similar journey with you?
Yep, I think so. I think he's a little bit better than me though, which is good. He'll need to start doing some interviews in Samoan, hopefully.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's we're both on that same journey, so pretty excited.
Ultimate goal, I guess, get the young together for family occasions and everyone can speak fluent Samoan.
Yeah, that's the goal, obviously, yep.
And how cool would that be for your mum and dad if both you and Adi learned, but also your children?
Yeah, that'll be awesome. I know they'll be very proud and to be able to, especially Dad, can't really speak English that well, but he can. But being able to speak to him in Samoan would be awesome.
Have you sort of found that as you're starting to learn the language, you've felt a bit more at ease with your own culture or your own identity?
I've always felt at ease. Just for me, it was just about reconnect again.
Yeah.
And the most important thing was just to be able to connect with mum and dad a little bit deeper in terms of where they're from and, like I said, where I'm from. Mum's from Lutuanu'u and dad's from Siumu.
Lovely to be able to go back and speak to some of the rallies in the native community.
Yeah, 100%.
And that was Julian Savea talking to Joe Porter. A rare species of bird in Australia is so endangered, it's forgetting how to sing its own song. There are only about 300 regent honeyeaters left in the wild, and because they rarely hear each other, some are starting to imitate the song of other species. Researchers are now playing recordings of them in the wild to birds bred in captivity. The BBC's Victoria Gill has the details.
With only 300 left in the wild, the striking regent honeyeater and its song are disappearing from their native southeastern Australia. Researchers had set out just to find and monitor the remaining birds when they noticed that some honeyeaters no longer sang the right tune. Songbirds around the world, like these familiar UK species, learn to sing in very much the same way that humans learn to speak. They listen to and copy other adults.
What we're finding is that the regent honeyeater population is now so small and so sparsely distributed that some young males are actually unable to find other males of the regent honeyeater to kind of learn their songs from. And so they're ending up just learning the songs of other species they hear in the landscape.
With so much of their forest habitat destroyed to make way for agriculture, the researchers say that about 12% of regent honeyeaters have now completely lost their natural song, and it's vital for them to attract a mate and to breed. There is some conservation hope, though. In an effort to preserve the birds' calls, the researchers are playing recordings of the most melodious wild honeyeaters to captive bred birds. Reminding them how to sing properly before they're released into the wild could help them to find a mate and eventually make a tuneful recovery.
And that was Victoria Gill with that report. Many fans are still basking in the glory of yesterday's America's Cup victory, perhaps none more than Uber fan Aaron Happy. Happy by name, happy by nature, and also highly superstitious. Aaron developed a precision strategy that he reckons helped Team New Zealand bring home the big one. Yep, you heard correctly. Aaron is utterly convinced he helped win the America's Cup.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't admit to that on the radio, just because of the fact that could be fact-checked. But, I mean, in private, absolutely. I'm number one.
How did you do it? How did you do
it?
Talk
Well, it
us
all
through
goes back to Bermuda, right? So a bit of superstition kicked in there, where I was getting up at exactly the same time in the morning, sitting on the exact same spot on the couch, getting up and making my coffee at the exact same time, and obviously that flowed on to success. And then this time, when it was a bit tight, we got to that race on the Sunday, and I had whacked on a certain pair of boardies and a T-shirt, and then we charged through. So I was like, oh my God, this is the outfit that I've got to wear now until we win the cup.
Hang on a minute, Aaron. Just park it up for a second. On what day did you first wear the T-shirt and shorts, the lucky T-shirt and shorts?
That was on the Sunday afternoon. So the second race. So we lost the first one, and for whatever reason, I changed my outfit. I can't actually reflect on why I did that, because that sounds weird in itself, but we'll just move on through that one. And then we won, so I took that as a sign, and that was the Sunday afternoon's race, and then I just wore it through. But we got to Tuesday night, and it was right. We need to do something about this, because the outfit is now starting to stand up by itself.
I need to ask this, Aaron, and please forgive me. When you say that you felt it was necessary to repeat exactly the same outfit, are you talking about every layer of clothing?
Well, see, I mean, it's very summary, so therefore it was just board shorts and a T-shirt. If you get my drift. So there was no undergarments, because it was just board shorts. Like, I'm ready for the beach at any stage, you see.
So by about Tuesday, you get a sense that things are getting a bit whiffy.
Well, when you walk into a room and people are looking at you like, is he wearing the same clothes again? And so I felt a need to explain myself, to which I did, and then I thought about it, I was like, right, so I said to my partner, we need to wash this kit, but it needs to be ready for the morning. So on the Wednesday morning, it was still a little bit damp, but I chucked it on and wore it anyway.
You're sounding like a top bloke that anyone would want to spend time with, Aaron.
Well, now that I'm clean, especially, but yeah.
So why maybe, if you're the Uber fan, did you not kind of get on a boat? Because I understand that you've got a boat. You could have sort of chugged out there and bobbed around.
Well, I've got a very nice boat, actually, but again, it got to the point where I felt that if I changed the routine and went out on the water and enjoyed it, then I could potentially put a jinx on it. I don't know, it's all madness, and I'm happy for someone to diagnose me, but that was my thought process.
So same outfit, day in and day out. Yeah, just a quick spruce up the night before, chuck it all on, still damp, coffee at the same time. To the minute, are we talking here or what?
Oh, that was for Bermuda, but yeah, that was to the minute. Yeah, that was a very military operation. In fact, much like washing my clothes was a military operation, just so that they were ready.
So this time, did you use a set play day by day?
Well, you've got to find the right combination, right? So once we had that win, that was it. It was like a little trigger had been switched in my head. That seemed to be what it was, and that's what I stuck with. And due to a little bit of commitment from, obviously, Emirates and many, many other people, we got there. Couldn't be happier, to be honest.
So
thinking of getting an Emirates tattoo now. Team New Zealand tattoo.
And what would that be? What would you feature in it, in your boardies and your T-shirt?
My 9-year-old daughter reminded me that I'd actually said I'd get a tattoo if they won. So what I'm thinking is I might just get the logo that's on the shorts, but just get it on my thigh directly underneath the logo that's on my shorts. I mean, that makes perfect sense to me.
Right, but you're not overthinking it at this point.
No. It's probably fair to say I don't overthink anything, to be honest, but we'll not reflect on that.
While we've got you on the line, would you like to say something to the team that you helped win?
I'm speechless and very proud Kiwi, and quite frankly, I don't know how they do it. Those I've got a reasonable sized boat, and that's a lot of boat in front of me, and those things are just weapons. And I don't know, they are amazing blokes, from the designers right through to old Pete Burling on the wheel there. It's just incredible what they achieve, especially for a little nation like us.
So, Aaron Happy's pretty damn happy.
I am over the moon happy, yes.
Hey, just a quick question before we go. What's happened to the shorts and the tee?
Well, last I looked, they were on the floor of the bedroom. They've probably been picked up for a proper rinsing, I'd say.
And that is Aaron Happy. As we said, happy by name, happy by nature. A couple of you have got in touch about Aaron. As he said, he's happy to be diagnosed. This person says he's mad, but God bless him. Another says, lucky outfit. Is that like the Red Sox? No, not like the Red Sox, one iota. If you check it out online, we'll put that interview up. You can see the outfit in all its glory before and after washing. So do go on to our Facebook page. On other topics, a lot of you have got in touch about Constable Linda. We interviewed her earlier in the program. She's 57 years old and she's just graduated as a new cop on the beat. Been on the beat for about a month. The police college tells us oldest graduate on record. This listener says, good for you, Constable. You're an inspiration. Another person says, listening to your story about being older and joining the police at age 59, I joined New Zealand Customs. Best decision I ever made. Loving it. Another person says, we cannot put a value on her life experience and value to our community as a police officer. Kia kaha, Linda. And someone else says, go Linda, capital letters, 4 exclamation marks. Well done. Thank you for all your feedback. We will be back tomorrow. First Up is with you first thing tomorrow morning.
Soon, but no timeline has been set. The Crown has been making its closing address in the trial of a prominent businessman accused of indecent assault. The National Party is worried local voices will be lost if the Director General of Health is handed responsibility for water fluoridation instead of DHBs as their bill intended. The Child Support Amendment Bill has passed its third reading in Parliament. Those are the headlines. Our next news is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
It's an exhilarating ride.